And that's the crisis we face now.
That's their response to these turmoils of the people and the actions of the people that you're talking about.
And what they are doing now is they are re-experimenting with an abandonment of the elementary principles of the Constitution and replacing it by what? Let's face it. What are they replacing it by? They're replacing it by total, totalitarian rule of the master up there.
So it gives the president totalitarian powers to suspend the Constitution, to violate anyone's right whenever the president deems it's necessary.
And what I discovered a lot of people throughout the country don't know is that Reagan and Bush sent Oliver North to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to do a memorandum as to what they should do in case of an emergency where a lot of people in this country would not agree with their engaging in military activities.
Like an invasion
or anywhere in the world. And what do? And he writes out, and this was in, as you know, the Miami Herald. During the Iran-Contra hearings.
July 5th, 1987.
That the president should issue an order, and in so many words. And when I saw that for the first time, I couldn't believe it. Suspending the Constitution of the United States. Suspending the Congress and replacing it with a military government. Suspending local and state legislatures. Suspending the courts and replacing them with military tribunals and establishing detention camps throughout the country in which any person who didn't agree with this proclamation would be thrown in.
And what's even worse, it isn't just a decision of the president. They've delegated that. They have provisions to delegate this authority to local commanders and police authorities so that they can suspend civil liberties on a local basis.
On a local level, whenever they want to.
I think one of the most key elements of it is nationalizing, in essence, the National Guard and taking away control of the National Guard in a time of emergency from the governor, who is, of course, responding to an electorate, and placing the control directly into the military, who is not responding to either Congress or the president, but potentially a group of emergency managers in some little bunker someplace who take control of America in the name of Congress and the presidency until things are back under control.
Now, there's scenarios
This is a little bit like Dr. Strangelove.
Right, exactly, where the military would take over. And in fact, there are scenarios where nuclear war, that after a nuclear war, you would need some group to try to get production organized or save lives, etc. But
well, that was under Carter,
that was the theory of the real.
This was the origin of this. But they also talked about national emergencies during the Central America era, where there was talk about invasion of Nicaragua, where there would be dissent, as there was in Vietnam, and then the president could declare a national emergency, and they could round up dissidents and literally put them in concentration camps that were named and localized.
What's important they already had this under the McCarran Act. This was different in that it delegated this authority to come in and put people in concentration camps and declare martial law to the local level. I mean,
that was the key to how horrible it was, is that there was no one who was responding to an electorate had control over this decision making. It was a group of managers, micromanagers and macromanagers were going to move in and decide that your city is too riotous, we're going to shut it down and take care of business, and we'll give it back to you when things are back under control. Well, that's, pretty scary. It's a pretty scary construct.
And any local police authority or army or military authority can say, hey, I don't want, what's happening in this town? Okay. There we are.
Sign an order.
That's right.
But they did have a national organization of FEMA. They had an office outside of Berryville, Virginia, I think.
That's correct.
That had a little village that would manage things in case of a national emergency. And we have no idea who these people were, what their plans were, what their scenarios were.
They certainly didn't appear in front of Congress and justify themselves, because they couldn't. Because if they ever did, people would go nuts.
It was a top secret, really neo-fascist authoritarian military.
What's fascinating is during the Iran-Contra hearings is when Representative Brooks tried to bring this up, and he was silent, bipartisan silent. I mean, everyone said, oh, we don't talk about these things, because it's too important to keep this quiet.
Colonel North, in your work at the NSC, were you not assigned at one time to work on plans for the continuity of government in the event of a major disaster?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that question touches upon a highly sensitive and classified area, so may I request that you not touch upon that, sir.
I was particularly concerned, Mr. Chairman, because I read in Miami papers and several others that there had been a plan developed by that same agency, a contingency plan in the event of emergency that would suspend the American Constitution. And I was deeply concerned about it and wondered if that was the area in which he had worked. I believe that it was, but I wanted to get his confirmation.
May I most respectfully request that that matter not be touched upon at this stage. If we wish to get into this, I'm certain arrangements can be made for an executive session.
They immediately suppress it, and they say, this is something we can't discuss in the open.
Security, yes.
People aren't allowed to know about this. And that's why. Who protected this information? Who protected Oliver North? The head Democrat, which goes to show you the power structure is the same.
With respect to Brooks challenging North or asking him about these residual standby plans, which have been in existence for some time, but which are more proximate to us today as a result of a national security advisory that President Reagan signed in May of 1984, and which of course is by its very nature under the coverage of security, and you could be hauled up and brought in by the FBI and charged with espionage if you were to reveal any knowledge as to the exact content of that document. But there's no question that it was patterned after what was talked about during the Watergate crisis. At that time, there were standby powers. General Haig at that time was the one in which there were such things seriously discussed as the suspension of the national elections in 1974, or rather 72. If there were turbulence and disorder throughout the country that would prevent an orderly process, well, who's going to determine that? Once you do that, then it's possible to invoke such things as military.
If the American people knew how loose this has become, I mean, you always need scenarios for a disaster. Right. And you know, our government would be ill-serving us if they didn't prepare these scenarios. But when you bring into these scenarios domestic dissent as a provocateur of this being implemented, then we're talking about a level of political repression that I don't think Congress would tolerate if the people knew about it. But they don't know about it because, of course, it's a matter of national security that we don't talk about it, therefore we got to trust them. Well, trust them? I mean, they don't have a very good track record in some of these agencies for trust.